is interpretation. A poem well read is a poem well understood. In this podcast, brought to you by the Literary Life Podcast, poet Thomas Banks will help you increase your love and understanding of poetry. Each short season of weekly episodes will be connected by a particular theme or focus, and in addition to modeling good reading, Mr. Banks will introduce the poet and provide some light explication and analysis, with an emphasis on both form and meaning. Poetry is not a silent endeavor. It's meant to be heard, and more importantly, it's meant to be recited out loud. Join us now as poet Thomas Banks presents the well-read poem.
Hello, and welcome to the Well-Read Poem. During this season, I am going to be reading 6 poems of family life. These poems are written in various styles in different ways at different times by a wide variety of different poets. And also, I should say they're very different in style, and all of them evoke some different relationship or aspect or side of what it is to be a father, a son, a mother, a daughter, a grandson, a granddaughter. And I thought it would be an appropriate way to begin this new year. The first poem I'm going to read is entitled My Sister's Sleep by Dante Rosetti. Rosetti, both Dante Rosetti and his sister Christina Rosetti, I have read before on the Well-Read Poem. And he is one of the principal Victorian poets, famous as a founder of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And this poem is a remarkably quiet poem, where a sort of silent domestic scene right on the edge of Christmas. You know, it's late night on Christmas Eve when the poem begins, which is important. And you have a mother and her children sitting about, awaiting not just Christmas, but something else, a much darker and more catastrophic event. This is a poem of death and rebirth, and the death in it is one which you can almost be surprised by when you encounter it. It's a poem that's very delicate in its treatment of a harrowing subject, and it's one that Dante Rosetti is rightly celebrated for. The stanza form, it's written in iambic tetrameter, so 4 iambic beats per line, and the rhyme scheme is A, B, B, A. A, B, B, A. And that rhyme scheme and stanza type was famously used by Dante Rosetti's contemporary Alfred Lord Tennyson in his long lyric sequence In Memoriam, which is also a somber and kind of pensively romantic examination of death, loss, and the ideas of immortality and friendship and rebirth. So, My Sister's Sleep by Dante Rosetti. She fell asleep on Christmas Eve. At length, the long-ungranted shade of weary eyelids overweighed the pain naught else might yet relieve. Our mother, who had leaned all day over the bed from chime to chime, then raised herself for the first time, and as she sat her down, did pray. Her little work table was spread with work to finish. For the glare made by her candle, she had care to work some distance from the bed. Without, there was a cold moon up, of winter radiance sheer and thin. The hollow halo it was in was like an icy crystal cup. Through the small room, with subtle sound of flame, by vents the fireshine drove and reddened. In its dim alcove the mirror shed a clearness round. I had been sitting up some nights, and my tired mind felt weak and blank. Like a sharp strengthening wine, it drank the stillness and the broken lights. 12 struck. That sound, by dwindling years heard in each hour, crept off. And then the ruffled silence spread again, like water that a pebble stirs. Our mother rose from where she sat. Her needles, as she laid them down, met lightly, and her silken gown settled. No other noise than that. Glory unto the newly born. So as said angels, she did say, because we were in Christmas Day, though it would still be long till morn. Just then, in the room over us, there was a pushing back of chairs, as some who had sat unawares so late now heard the hour and rose. With anxious, softly stepping haste, our mother went where Margaret lay, fearing the sound o'erhead, should they have broken her long watched-for rest. She stooped an instant, calm, and turned, but suddenly turned back again, and all her features seemed in pain with woe, and her eyes gazed and yearned. For my part, I but hid my face, and held my breath, and spoke no word. There was none spoken, but I heard the silence for a little space. Our mother bowed herself and wept, and both my arms fell, and I said, God knows I knew that she was dead. And there, all white, my sister slept. Then kneeling, upon Christmas morn, a little after 12 o'clock, we said, ere the first quarter struck, Christ's blessing on the newly born. This is a poem, as I said, which is very, very subtle in how it builds up as kind of, it's a narrative. It's a short, you could make a short story of this same poem, and in its lyric and emotional effects. And also it's a poem that makes you see how Dante Rosetti's several artistic gifts, because he was a painter as well as a poet, kind of complemented one another. Especially in one or two stanzas, for instance, where the mother stands up just as the hour strikes, just as Christmas Day is rung in. And he says, first of all, the ruffled silence spread again, like water that a pebble stirs, where there's a silence that's just barely broken by some kind of atmospheric noise. That, I think, is very, very well done. The ruffled silence spread again like water that a pebble stirs. And then he continues in the next stanza, our mother rose from where she sat. Her needles, as she laid them down, met lightly, and her silken gown settled. No other noise than that. These are comparatively unimportant things. The mother hearing the chime as Christmas Day is told, sets her knitting needles down, which make a very slight clicking noise as she sets them down, and the fabric of her dress rustling as she stands. And you might say, well, this is maybe just a poet showing off, showing his leisure domain, the tricks he can play with words. I don't think that's true, though, because remember, this is a poem from the point of view of a sibling. There's no reason to believe that this is based on a personal memory, but it's told from a sibling's point of view as his or her sister is dying. And remembering little things like that, one's mother standing up and putting her needles down, it seems to me entirely believable, entirely credible that such a detail might be remembered long after the tragic event itself. Remembering that everyone is sitting around occupying themselves with waiting for Christmas Day or knitting while a beloved family member is dying upstairs. It's a very, very strong poem and not vapidly melodramatic in any way. A beautifully done thing. Let me just read the last few stanzas here. Glory unto the newly born. So, as said angels, she did say, because we were in Christmas Day, though it would still be long till morn. Just then, in the room over us, there was a pushing back of chairs, as some who had sat unawares so late now heard the hour and rose. With anxious, softly stepping haste, our mother went where Margaret lay, fearing the sounds o'erhead, should they have broken her long watched-for rest. She stooped an instant, calm, and turned, but suddenly turned back again, and all her features seemed in pain with woe, and her eyes gazed and yearned. For my part, I but hid my face, and held my breath, and spoke no word. There was none spoken, but I heard the silence for a little space. Our mother bowed herself and wept, and both my arms fell, and I said, God knows I knew that she was dead. And there, all white, my sister slept. Then, kneeling, upon Christmas morn, a little after 12 o'clock, we said, ere the first quarter struck, Christ's blessing on the newly born. Thank you very much.
This has been The Well-Read Poem with poet Thomas Banks, brought to you by the Literary Life podcast. For show notes and the text of the poem, visit theliterary.life. To find out more about Thomas Banks and the poetry resources he offers, go to houseofhumaneletters.com. This podcast is patron-supported. Visit patreon.com/theliterarylife to find out how you can support this podcast and get additional bonus content, including monthly live poetry explications. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Thank you for listening.